The day before my sister's wedding, she went silent. Not the comfortable quiet we'd shared countless times growing up. This silence was heavy, suffocating, like storm clouds gathering over what should have been the happiest day of her life. I found her sitting alone on our childhood porch swing, her wedding dress hanging nearby, pristine and waiting. Her eyes, usually bright with laughter, stared vacantly across our parents' garden. My heart shattered seeing her that way, and I knew something was terribly wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up, Emma and I were inseparable, despite being 4 years apart. I was the protective older brother, she the spirited little sister, who somehow always managed to teach me more about life than I could ever teach her. We'd shared every milestone: first days of school, awkward teenage years, college acceptances, heartbreaks. Now, at 32, I was supposed to walk her down the aisle tomorrow, stepping in for our father who'd passed away 3 years earlier. The weight of that responsibility had been pressing on my shoulders for months, but the heaviness in my chest now as I approached her on the porch was something different entirely. Something was wrong, and the silence between us stretched longer with each passing second. "Em?" I kept my voice gentle, the way I used to when she'd wake from nightmares as a child. "What's going on?" She didn't look at me right away. Her fingers traced invisible patterns on the weathered wood of the swing. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't think I can do this, Noah." I sat beside her, careful not to disrupt whatever fragile peace she'd found in her solitude. The swing creaked beneath our weight, a familiar sound from countless summer evenings spent talking about dreams and fears and everything in between. "The wedding?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She nodded, a single tear escaping down her cheek. "I keep thinking about Dad, how he should be here, how everything should feel perfect, but instead it feels—" She trailed off, searching for words. "Empty." I finished for her. It was a feeling I understood all too well. Not just that. Emma's voice strengthened slightly. "I've been having these doubts about Daniel. Tiny things at first. Comments about my family, my career, my friends. But lately—" She looked down at her engagement ring, twisting it anxiously. "Last week, he said my dress was acceptable, not beautiful or perfect. Acceptable, like I was submitting a report for his approval." I felt a flicker of anger but kept my expression neutral. Emma needed a listener, not a defender, at least not yet. And yesterday, when Mom was telling stories about Dad, Daniel checked his watch 3 times in 5 minutes. Then he pulled me aside and asked if we could speed things along because he had a conference call. The swing moved gently beneath us, pushed by the evening breeze. In the distance, I could hear the caterers setting up in the backyard, preparing for tomorrow's celebration. All the careful planning, the flowers, the music, all suddenly hanging by a thread as delicate as the lace on Emma's veil. "Have you talked to him about how you feel?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. She shook her head. "Every time I try, he tells me I'm being emotional or overreacting, that it's just pre-wedding jitters." Her fingers wrapped around the chain of the swing, knuckles whitening. "But what if it's more than that? What if I'm making the biggest mistake of my life?" I thought carefully before responding. My protective instinct wanted to tell her to run, to call everything off, but this wasn't my decision to make. "Remember what Dad used to say?" I asked gently, "about following your compass, not your clock." A small smile flickered across her face. "That timing isn't as important as direction." "Exactly." I placed my hand over hers. "There's no timeline you have to follow, Em, no matter how many deposits have been paid or invitations sent out. If something doesn't feel right, that's your compass talking." She leaned her head against my shoulder, the way she used to when we'd watch thunderstorms roll in from this very porch. "But what about everyone coming tomorrow? What about Mom? She's put everything into this wedding." "Mom wants you to be happy. Everyone who loves you wants that. A wedding is one day. A marriage is supposed to be forever." We sat in silence for several minutes, the only sound the gentle creak of the swing and distant laughter from the rehearsal dinner setup. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that would have been perfect for wedding photos. "I need to tell you something else," Emma finally said, her voice steadier now. "Something I haven't told anyone. I waited, giving her the space to find her words. 3 days ago, I found messages on Daniel's phone. He's been talking to his ex, planning to meet her next month during what's supposed to be our honeymoon. Her voice cracked slightly, but she continued. He told her the wedding was an unfortunate business necessity because of his father's connections to my company. The anger I'd been suppressing flared hot and immediate. Emma, that's... I know what it is, she interrupted, a new firmness in her voice. I just haven't known what to do about it. Part of me kept hoping there was some explanation, that I was misunderstanding something. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm for her sake. What does your compass say now? She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. Then, with more certainty than I'd heard in months, that I deserve better than this. That Dad would have wanted better for me. Relief washed over me, though I tried not to show it. Then that's your answer. But how do I do this, Noah? How do I walk in there right now and tell everyone the wedding is off? How do I face Daniel's family, my friends, everyone who's traveled here? Her voice trembled with the enormity of what lay ahead. I squeezed her hand. You don't have to do it alone. I'll be right beside you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Inside the house, the rehearsal dinner was in full swing. Laughter spilled from the dining room, clinking glasses and excited voices creating the perfect soundtrack for what should have been a joyful evening. Emma and I stood in the hallway, her hand gripping mine so tightly I could feel her pulse racing through her fingertips. I can't breathe, she whispered, panic edging into her voice. Yes, you can, I assured her. Slow and steady, just like when we used to practice for your swim meets, remember? A flicker of a smile crossed her face at the memory. She nodded, took a deep breath, and we stepped into the room together. The conversations didn't stop immediately. It happened in waves. First, those closest to the door noticing our arrival. Then their sudden silence spreading like ripples in a pond until the entire room was looking at us. Emma, still in her casual clothes when she should have been dressed for the rehearsal dinner, and me, standing beside her with what must have been a fiercely protective expression. Daniel was the first to approach, irritation barely concealed behind a practiced smile. There you are. Everyone's been waiting. He reached for Emma's arm, but she took a step back, staying firmly at my side. I need to say something, Emma announced, her voice surprisingly steady despite the slight tremor I could feel through her hand. To everyone. Our mother moved through the crowd, concern etched across her face. Emma, sweetheart, what's going on? The room held its breath. 60 pairs of eyes fixed on my sister as she stood straighter, summoning a strength I'd always known she possessed. The wedding is off, she said, each word clear and deliberate. I'm sorry for the inconvenience this causes everyone, especially those who've traveled to be here. But I can't go through with it. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by a sharp intake of breath from Daniel's mother and the sound of a glass being set down too hard somewhere in the back of the room. This is ridiculous, Daniel finally said, his voice tight with controlled anger. You're just nervous. We can discuss this privately. He reached for her again, but I stepped slightly forward, creating a barrier between them. No, Daniel, Emma said, stronger now. This isn't a discussion or a negotiation. The wedding is off because our relationship is over. His facade cracked then, irritation bleeding into something uglier. You can't be serious. Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? My family's connections alone are exactly why you proposed in the first place. Emma finished for him. I know about the messages to Melissa. I know about your unfortunate business necessity. A gasp rippled through the room. Daniel's face drained of color, then flushed dark with anger and embarrassment. His father stepped forward, a hand on his son's shoulder. Perhaps we should give everyone some space to calm down. I'm perfectly calm, Emma replied. Calmer than I've been in months, actually. She turned to address the whole room. I'm sorry that my realization comes at such a late hour. I truly am. But I would rather face this embarrassment tonight than a lifetime of regret beginning tomorrow. Our mother had made her way to Emma's other side, forming a protective flank. "Whatever you need, sweetheart," she said quietly, and the relief on Emma's face at this simple acceptance was palpable. Daniel's mother wasn't as understanding. "You realize you'll have to return all the gifts," she said icily, "and the deposits are non-refundable at this point." I felt Emma tense beside me, but before she could respond, our mother spoke up. "Margaret, with all due respect, I think there are more important matters at hand than deposits and presents." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Guests stood awkwardly, unsure whether to leave or stay, whether to offer comfort or pretend they hadn't witnessed this implosion of what should have been a fairy tale weekend. Daniel made one last attempt, his voice low and threatening as he leaned toward Emma. "You'll regret this. My father can make sure you never advance in your field again." I felt a surge of protective rage, but Emma didn't need my defense. She looked him directly in the eyes and spoke with a clarity that silenced the entire room. "No, Daniel. The only thing I would regret is marrying someone who sees me as a business transaction rather than a partner. Someone who plans to cheat on me during our honeymoon. Someone who checks his watch when my family shares memories of my deceased father." She took off her engagement ring and held it out to him. "I deserve better. And I've wasted enough time convincing myself otherwise." The dignity in her voice was unmistakable. Even Daniel seemed to shrink under the weight of her truth, taking the ring with uncharacteristic silence. His family began gathering their things, muttering about scandal and embarrassment. Friends and relatives stood in stunned clusters, some already reaching for their phones, no doubt to spread the news of the wedding that wouldn't be. Through it all, Emma remained standing tall, flanked by me and our mother, a united front against the whispers and stares. When Daniel and his family had finally left, the tension in the room eased slightly, though the shock remained. Emma addressed the remaining guests, her voice warm despite the circumstances. "I'm truly sorry for the disruption. Please enjoy the food and drinks. There's no reason this evening should be a total loss." Then, quieter to me and Mom, "I need some air." The three of us slipped out onto the back porch, away from the murmurs and speculation. In the fading twilight, Emma finally let her composure crack, tears streaming down her face as Mom wrapped her in a tight embrace. "I'm so proud of you," Mom whispered, stroking Emma's hair. "Your father would be too." Emma pulled back, wiping at her tears. "Really? You're not disappointed? All the planning, the money." "None of that matters," Mom said firmly. "Not compared to your happiness. Not compared to your worth." I stood watching them, a lump forming in my throat. Our family had weathered so much. Dad's illness, his death, the rebuilding of our lives in his absence. And here we were again, facing another storm together. What happens now? Emma asked, her voice small but no longer broken. I sat beside her on the porch steps. "Now, we call the vendors and the venue. We contact the guests who aren't here yet. We handle the practical stuff." "And then?" she asked. "And then you breathe," Mom said simply. "You remember who you are. You rebuild. One day at a time." Emma nodded slowly, then looked up at the emerging stars. "I keep thinking about what Dad would say if he were here." I smiled, remembering our father's unwavering wisdom. He'd probably say something about how the strongest trees are the ones that bend with the wind rather than breaking. "And then he'd make some terrible joke to lighten the mood," Mom added, a bittersweet smile playing at her lips. For the first time that day, Emma laughed, a small, fragile sound, but genuine. "He would, wouldn't he?" Something about how at least we can return the ugly serving platter his cousin Mildred sent. The three of us sat there in the growing darkness, laughing through tears, holding space for grief and relief simultaneously. Behind us, the rehearsal dinner guests were quietly departing, leaving the caterers to pack up food that would never serve its intended purpose. "I should go back in," Emma sighed. "Thank people for coming, apologize again." I shook my head. "Not tonight. Tonight you rest. I'll handle the guests." "We both will," Mom affirmed, squeezing Emma's hand. "You've done the hardest part already." Emma looked between us, gratitude shining in her eyes despite the tears. "I don't know what I would have done without you both today." "You would have found your way," I told her with certainty. But I'm glad you didn't have to do it alone. She nodded, then looked out at the garden where tomorrow's ceremony was supposed to take place. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees, creating a magical canopy over what would now be just another Saturday. I should feel devastated, she said softly. But underneath everything else there's this sense of relief. Is that terrible? It's honest, Mom replied. And honesty is never terrible. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds and the diminishing bustle from inside the house. The caterers started packing up their vans, the florists would be called in the morning, and the carefully chosen wedding favors would be boxed away. All the external trappings of celebration were falling away, leaving only what mattered most, our family, bound together not by obligation but by love. You know what Dad's other favorite saying was? I said finally, as the last car pulled away from the house. Emma smiled, reciting it with me in unison. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is change your mind. As we sat there under the stars, I realized that what had started as heartbreak, seeing my sister in such pain, had transformed into something else entirely. Pride. Admiration. A bone-deep certainty that she would not just survive this but emerge stronger than before. The wedding that would never happen had cleared the way for something far more important. My sister reclaiming her worth, remembering her voice, and choosing herself when it mattered most. In the garden beyond us, the wedding arch stood draped in flowers, waiting for a ceremony that wouldn't come. But it seemed less like an emblem of failure now and more like a doorway to something new. A future Emma would build on her own terms, guided by her own compass rather than someone else's expectations. Tomorrow would bring practicalities, explanations, and inevitably gossip. But tonight, in the quiet aftermath of courage, we had everything we needed. Each other, the memory of our father's wisdom, and the unshakable knowledge that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings arise from the weddings that never happen. And as I looked at Emma, her eyes clearer now despite the tears, her shoulders no longer bent under the weight of compromise, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't an ending. It was the first brave step of a new journey, one where she walked not down an aisle toward a future built on lies, but toward a horizon bright with possibilities she was finally free to explore. The night after Emma called off her wedding was the longest of my life. I sat on the edge of my bed in our childhood home, staring at the tuxedo that hung on my closet door, unworn and unnecessary now. Outside, workers had already begun dismantling the wedding arch in the pre-dawn darkness, fairy lights coming down like stars falling from the sky. The garden that should have witnessed my sister's happiest day was instead being returned to normal, as if nothing had happened at all. Sleep had eluded me entirely. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Emma's face as she confronted Daniel, strength emerging through heartbreak, dignity rising from betrayal. I saw our mother's unwavering support, despite the chaos and expense. And I saw the future that Emma had narrowly avoided. A life built on lies with a man who viewed her as nothing more than a business transaction. My phone buzzed with a text message. Emma, also awake despite the early hour. Can't sleep? Porch? I found her where we'd sat the evening before, wrapped in our father's old cardigan despite the mild spring air. She looked up as I approached, offering a small, tired smile. Did you sleep at all? I asked, sitting beside her. She shook her head. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept playing everything over and over, wondering if I did the right thing. Do you think you didn't? Emma was quiet for a moment, watching the workers in the garden folding chairs and stacking them in the rental company's truck. No, she finally said. I know I did. It's just, I keep thinking about all the people I've disappointed, all the explanations I'll have to give. I nudged her shoulder gently with mine. You didn't disappoint anyone who matters. Mom spent so much money. Mom spent money on what she thought would make you happy. I interrupted gently. Finding out you wouldn't be happy with Daniel? That's worth every penny. Emma leaned her head against my shoulder the way she used to when we were kids watching thunderstorms roll in from this very spot. How did I not see it sooner, Noah? All the signs were there. The controlling behavior, the dismissiveness, the way he talked about my career like it was a cute hobby. Because love makes us want to believe the best version of people is the real one, I said simply. It's not a character flaw to hope someone is better than they are. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunrise paint the dismantled wedding venue in shades of gold and pink. The workers moved efficiently, erasing all evidence of what should have been. In just a few hours, there would be nothing left but an empty garden and the memories of what hadn't happened. "I should probably start making calls," Emma said finally, her voice stronger. "Aunt Josephine is flying in this afternoon. Cousin Michael and his family are already at their hotel. I can make those calls," I offered. "Or at least some of them." She shook her head. "No, this is my responsibility. My choice, my consequences." She straightened her shoulders, a familiar determination settling over her features. "Besides, I think I need to tell the story. Each time I explain it, it becomes more real. Less like I might wake up and find it was all a bad dream." I understood what she meant. Sometimes voicing our truths aloud is how we come to fully own them. "What about work?" I asked. Daniel's father's threat about her career advancement still lingered in my mind. A flash of worry crossed her face before settling into resolve. "I have a meeting with my boss on Monday. I'm going to tell her everything, including Daniel's father's threat. Sarah's a good person. I have to believe honesty is the best approach." "Want me to come with you?" "I could wait outside, be there for moral support." Emma smiled, a genuine one this time. "Thanks, but no. This is something I need to do myself." She stood, stretching as if preparing for a long day ahead. "Besides, you have your own life to get back to. You've already done more than enough." I shook my head, rising to stand beside her. "I'm not going anywhere until I know you're okay. Perks of remote work. My laptop doesn't care where I am." Her eyes welled with tears, but they were different from yesterday's, lighter somehow, born of gratitude rather than grief. "You know what's strange? I feel terrible and okay at the same time. Like I'm standing in the ruins of something, but at least they're honest ruins. Does that make any sense?" "More sense than you know," I assured her. The rest of the day unfolded in a blur of activity. Emma made call after call, explaining to relatives and friends why they should unpack their formal wear and enjoy a weekend in Connecticut instead. Most were supportive, expressing concern for Emma rather than disappointment about the canceled celebration. A few were awkwardly silent, clearly unsure what to say. Only Daniel's Aunt Martha explicitly voiced disapproval, calling Emma impulsive and dramatic before hanging up abruptly. Our mother handled the vendors with remarkable efficiency, negotiating partial refunds where possible and donating the prepared food to a local shelter. The flowers, hundreds of carefully selected roses and peonies, were delivered to nursing homes throughout the county, bringing unexpected joy to residents who would never know the blooms were meant for a wedding that didn't happen. By mid-afternoon, Emma's phone was buzzing constantly with messages from friends offering support and, increasingly, sharing stories they'd held back about Daniel, red flags they'd noticed but hadn't mentioned, not wanting to rain on her happiness. The picture they painted confirmed what Emma already knew. She'd made the right choice, however painful. "Why didn't anyone say something sooner?" she asked, scrolling through a particularly telling message from her college roommate about Daniel's controlling behavior at their dinner party last Christmas. I sat beside her at the kitchen table, where we'd set up Command Central for Operation Unwedding, as Mom had dubbed it with her characteristic ability to find humor even in difficult situations. "People are afraid of overstepping," I said carefully, "of being wrong, of hurting you if they were mistaken." "I might have listened," she said softly, "if it had been you." The weight of those words settled heavily on my shoulders. Had I seen signs too? Had I chosen silence when I should have spoken? I thought back to the few times I'd met Daniel, the subtle discomfort I'd felt but dismissed as ordinary brotherly protectiveness. "I'm sorry if I failed you," I said finally. Emma looked up, surprise clear on her face. "You didn't fail me, Noah. You were there when it mattered most. When I needed someone to help me trust my own instincts, not override them with well-meaning advice." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "That's worth more than any warning you could have given earlier." Our mother entered then, carrying a tray of sandwiches she'd made from the rehearsal dinner leftovers. "You two need to eat something," she insisted, setting it between us. "Crisis or no crisis, food is non-negotiable." Emma smiled, taking a sandwich. "How are you so calm about all this, Mom? The money, the embarrassment, the money is just money," Mom interrupted firmly. "As for embarrassment, I've never been prouder of you than I was last night. watching you stand up for yourself. There's no shame in choosing your happiness over others' expectations. She sat down with her own sandwich, expression thoughtful. Though I will admit, I did have a moment alone in my room where I threw a pillow against the wall and had a good cry about the wasted cake deposit. That thing was expensive. We all laughed, the tension in the room easing slightly. It felt good, healing somehow, to find humor amid the wreckage. Dad would have approved. He'd always believed laughter was medicine for the soul, especially when times were hard. What about Daniel? I asked carefully, the question that had been hovering unspoken all day. Has he tried to contact you? Emma's expression darkened slightly. 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. I haven't read most of them. She took her phone out, scrolling through briefly before passing it to me. They started with anger, moved to manipulation, and now he's cycling through promises to change and threats about what I'll lose without him. I skimmed the messages, my jaw tightening with each one. The final text, sent just 20 minutes ago, made my blood boil. Your career was going nowhere before you met me. Good luck advancing without my father's connections. You'll come crawling back when you realize what you've thrown away. Mom read over my shoulder, her usual serene expression hardening. Block his number, she said decisively. Nothing good will come from maintaining any contact. Emma nodded, taking her phone back. I already did, after that last message. I just wanted you both to see what I was dealing with first. She pressed a few buttons, then set the phone face down on the table with a sense of finality. There. One less toxin in my life. What about his things at your apartment? I asked, practical concern surfacing. And yours at his? Lisa and Mark are going to help me pack up his stuff tomorrow, Emma said, referring to two of her closest friends. They'll drop the boxes at his parents' house. As for my things, she shrugged. Nothing irreplaceable. I'd rather lose a few sweaters and books than have to see him again. Just then, the doorbell rang. Mom rose to answer it, returning moments later with Aunt Josephine, Dad's sister, who had flown in from Arizona for the wedding. She swept into the kitchen like a force of nature, enveloping Emma in a fierce hug before she could even stand to greet her. My brave, beautiful niece, she declared, finally releasing Emma from her embrace. Your father would be bursting with pride right now. Fresh tears sprang to Emma's eyes at the mention of Dad. You think so? I know so, Aunt Jo said firmly. Richard valued authenticity above all else. He used to say, the truth might hurt for a while, but a lie hurts forever. She settled into the chair Mom offered, accepting a cup of tea with a grateful nod. Now tell me everything. I want to hear exactly how you sent that pompous jackass packing. Emma laughed through her tears, launching into the story. I watched as she recounted the events of the previous day, noticing how her voice grew stronger with each telling, her posture more confident. The narrative was shifting before my eyes, transforming from a tale of loss and disappointment into one of courage and self-respect. As the afternoon wore on, more family members arrived, all ostensibly in town for the wedding, now rallying around Emma in its absence. The kitchen filled with voices and laughter, the refrigerator emptied of rehearsal dinner leftovers, and someone uncorked the champagne that had been intended for tomorrow's toasts. To Emma, Uncle Robert proposed, raising his glass. For showing us all that it's never too late to choose yourself. To Emma, everyone echoed, glasses clinking in the warm kitchen light. My sister blushed but stood a little taller, accepting the toast with grace. I caught her eye across the room and saw something there I hadn't seen in months. A spark of the old Emma, the one who dove headfirst into adventures, who spoke her mind without apology, who had somehow gotten lost in Daniel's shadow without any of us fully noticing. Later that evening, when most of the family had retired to their hotels or guest rooms, Emma and I found ourselves back on the porch swing. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. In the garden, all evidence of the wedding that wasn't had been cleared away, leaving only familiar flower beds and the old oak tree we'd climbed as children. It's strange, Emma said softly. 24 hours ago, I was sitting here terrified of what would happen if I called off the wedding. Now I'm terrified of what would have happened if I hadn't. I nodded, understanding completely. That's how truth works sometimes. Scary as hell until you embrace it. Then the only scary thing is how close you came to denying it. She was quiet for a moment, swinging gently, her bare feet brushing the porch boards. I keep thinking about all the little compromises I made along the way, the red flags I ignored. The parts of myself I tucked away because they didn't fit into Daniel's vision of who I should be. Like what? She considered the question. Remember how I used to paint? Those big, messy, abstract canvases that drove Mom crazy because I'd get acrylics all over the hardwood? She smiled at the memory. Daniel called my art unfocused and amateur, said it didn't fit the aesthetic of his apartment. So I stopped. Just like that. Packed away my easel and haven't touched it in over a year. That doesn't sound like the Emma I know? I said gently. No, she agreed. It doesn't. But that's what happens, isn't it? The changes are so gradual you don't notice until you've become someone you barely recognize. She looked out at the night sky, expression pensive. It's like that story about how to boil a frog. You don't drop it in boiling water because it'll jump out. You put it in cool water and heat it slowly so it doesn't realize it's being cooked until it's too late. I winced at the metaphor but couldn't deny its accuracy. You jumped out in time. Thanks to you, she said, nudging my shoulder, for reminding me about Dad's compass. You would have found your way eventually, I assured her. With or without my navigation assistance. She laughed softly, then grew serious again. What do I do now, Noah? The wedding was consuming every part of my life for so long, and now there's just space. A big, empty future I need to refill somehow. I thought about her question carefully. Maybe that space is exactly what you need right now. Room to remember who you are without Daniel, or wedding plans, or anyone else's expectations. Emma nodded slowly. I've been thinking about taking some time off work, using those vacation days I saved for the honeymoon. Maybe go somewhere by myself. That sounds perfect, I encouraged. Where would you go? A small, genuine smile spread across her face, the kind I hadn't seen in too long. Remember that art retreat in New Mexico Dad always wanted to visit? The one with the adobe buildings and mountain views? The ghost ranch? I asked, surprised. You'd go there? Why not? I could paint again, hike. Meet people who don't know anything about my called-off wedding or Daniel or any of it. Her voice grew more animated with each word. I could just be Emma for a while. Figure out who that is again. The transformation happening before my eyes was remarkable. Not just acceptance of her situation, but the first tentative steps toward embracing it. Toward seeing the collapsed wedding not as an ending, but as an opening to something new. I think that sounds perfect, I said. Dad would love knowing you're going there. She leaned her head against my shoulder, the swing creaking gently beneath us. Will you be okay if I go away for a while? The question caught me off guard. Me? Of course. Why wouldn't I be? Because you've put your whole life on pause to be here for me. Because you always do that. Set aside your needs for mine. Her voice was gentle but insistent. I've been so caught up in my own drama. I haven't even asked about your job, your apartment search, that woman you were seeing in Chicago. I shrugged, slightly uncomfortable with the spotlight turning to me. The job's fine. The apartment hunt is ongoing. And Megan and I decided we're better as friends. Emma studied my face in the dim porch light. You know it's okay for you to have your own life, right? To put yourself first sometimes? Quote, says the woman who just torpedoed her own wedding rather than settle for less than she deserves. I teased, deflecting her concern. But Emma wouldn't be deterred. I'm serious, Noah. You've been taking care of me since we were kids. Making sure I was okay after Dad died. Being my rock through all of this. She gestured vaguely at the garden where her wedding should have taken place. But who's your rock? The question landed heavily, unexpectedly profound. I hadn't thought about it that way. Had always seen my role as protector, supporter, the steady one who kept things together while others fell apart. It was a role I'd embraced after Dad died, stepping into the void he left as best I could. But Emma was right. It often came at the expense of my own needs, my own dreams. I'm working on that, I said finally, more honest than I'd intended to be. Finding my own path, not just being someone else's compass. Emma squeezed my hand. Good. Because you deserve someone who sees you as clearly as you see everyone else. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the night sounds of crickets and distant traffic creating a peaceful backdrop to our thoughts. Eventually, Emma yawned, the emotional toll of the past 2 days finally catching up with her. You should get some sleep, I suggested. Tomorrow's another day of explanations and logistics. She nodded, rising from the swing. Will you sit with me a little longer, though? I'm not quite ready for the day to end. Of course, I said, making room for her to settle back beside me. Above us, the stars continued their silent journey across the sky. Below, the empty garden lay, waiting for new stories to unfold. And between us, brother and sister, survivors of grief, and now this unexpected detour, something was healing, strengthening, finding new ground. Emma might have been the one who called off her wedding, who faced down Daniel's cruelty with newfound courage. But somehow, watching her reclaim herself was changing me too. Reminding me of my own compass, my own path forward. As she drifted to sleep against my shoulder, I made a quiet promise to us both, that from these ruins we would build something better, something true, something worthy of the courage it took to create the empty space where falsehood once stood. 3 weeks after Emma called off her wedding, I stood in the doorway of her apartment, watching as she zipped up the final suitcase. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching on the bare walls where Daniel's pretentious art had once hung. In their place were empty nail holes, marks of absence that somehow made the space feel more like Emma's than it had in months. Are you sure you have everything? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. Passport? Tickets? That ancient sketchbook you refused to throw away? Emma patted her tote bag with a smile. All accounted for. The shuttle picks me up in an hour. She straightened, surveying the apartment with a critical eye. It looks different, doesn't it? Without all his stuff. Better, I confirmed. It looks like you again. The transformation wasn't just in the apartment. Emma herself seemed to be shedding layers with each passing day. The carefully curated persona she'd adopted during her relationship with Daniel, giving way to something more authentic. Her hair, which she'd kept meticulously straightened because he preferred it that way, now fell in its natural waves around her shoulders. The subtle makeup she'd worn daily at his insistence was gone, revealing freckles across her nose that I hadn't seen in years. My flight lands in Albuquerque at 4, she said, double-checking her itinerary. Then, it's about an hour's drive to Ghost Ranch. I should be there in time for dinner. I nodded, trying to hide my mix of emotions. Pride in her courage, happiness about her rediscovered independence, and yes, a touch of worry about her traveling alone so soon after everything had fallen apart. You're hovering, she observed, a teasing light in her eyes. Like when I went to college, and you called every day for 2 weeks to make sure I was eating vegetables. I did not call every day, I protested. It was every other day, Max. She laughed, the sound genuine and unrestrained, another thing that had been missing during her time with Daniel. You know I'll be fine, right? This is exactly what I need. I know, I admitted. I just worry, because that's what you do. She crossed the room and hugged me tightly. But this time, I need you to let me fall if I'm going to fall. Let me figure things out on my own. I returned the hug, acknowledging the truth in her words. Deal. But you'll call when you land? And text occasionally so I know you haven't been carried off by desert coyotes? I promised to document all coyote encounters in vivid detail, she said solemnly, then pulled back with a more serious expression. Thank you, Noah, for everything. For being there when I needed you most, and for knowing when to step back. Before I could respond, her phone chimed. The shuttle arriving early. We carried her bags downstairs in comfortable silence, both lost in our own thoughts about the journey ahead. Not just her physical trip to New Mexico, but the deeper journey of rediscovery she was embarking on. As the shuttle driver loaded her luggage, Emma turned to me one last time. What about you? What will you do while I'm gone? I shrugged, trying to sound casual. Head back to Chicago. Find that apartment I've been putting off. Maybe finally learn how to cook something besides pasta. She studied my face, seeing more than I wanted her to. Promise me something. Anything. Take your own advice. Follow your compass, not your clock. She squeezed my hand. Find what lights you up, Noah. You deserve that too. Then she was gone, waving from the shuttle window as it pulled away from the curb. I stood watching until it disappeared around the corner, her words echoing in my mind. Follow your compass, not your clock. Our father's wisdom now passed from me to her and back again like a family heirloom. The truth was, I'd been so focused on helping Emma navigate her crisis that I'd avoided confronting my own crossroads. My job in Chicago was secure but unfulfilling, my apartment search half-hearted at best. My recent breakup with Megan less about incompatibility and more about my inability to fully commit to building a life there. Standing on the empty sidewalk outside Emma's apartment building, I made a decision. Before returning to Chicago, I would take a detour, one I'd been postponing for too long. 3 hours later, I was on the road, driving the familiar route to our family's lake house in upstate New York. Dad had built it himself, a small but sturdy cabin nestled among pine trees, overlooking water so clear you could count pebbles 20 feet down. We'd spent every summer there, until his illness made travel impossible. After he died, none of us had the heart to visit. The cabin had stood empty for 3 years, maintained by a local caretaker but uninhabited. It was nearly sunset when I arrived, the lake a mirror reflecting orange and pink clouds. I sat in the car for several minutes, gathering courage to step into a space so filled with memories. Finally, I grabbed my overnight bag and approached the cabin, using the key that had hung unused on my keychain since Dad's funeral. The interior smelled of pine and dust, and faintly of the lemon oil Dad had always used on the wooden furniture. Everything was exactly as we'd left it. Fishing rods mounted on the wall, faded family photos on the mantel, the ancient record player Dad had refused to replace with modern technology. I ran my fingers over the back of his favorite armchair, half expecting to find him there, reading glasses perched on his nose, looking up with that gentle smile that made everyone feel understood. "I could use some of your wisdom right about now, Dad," I said aloud, my voice strange in the silent cabin. Outside, twilight deepened into true darkness. I built a fire in the stone fireplace, its warmth gradually pushing back the chill that had nothing to do with the mild spring evening. On the mantel, a photo of the 4 of us, Mom, Dad, Emma, and me, captured a moment from Emma's high school graduation. We were laughing about something I couldn't remember, our faces lit with joy and possibility. How quickly life could change. How suddenly the future you'd planned could dissolve, leaving you standing in the wreckage, wondering what came next. I thought about Emma, probably landing in New Mexico right about now, stepping into her own unknown with a courage I admired more than she realized. And I thought about myself. 36 years old, successful by conventional standards, but increasingly aware of a hollow space where purpose should be. The next morning I woke early, making coffee in the old percolator before walking down to the dock. The lake was perfectly still, mist rising from its surface like ghosts ascending. I sat with my feet dangling above the water, remembering countless summer mornings spent exactly like this, waiting for Dad to join me for our ritual sunrise fishing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Emma, true to her word, landed safely. Ghost Ranch is incredible. Mountains like you wouldn't believe. Starting a painting workshop this morning. How are you? I hesitated, then typed. At the lake house, first time since Dad. Her response came immediately. Oh, Noah, how is it? Hard, good, necessary, I think. 3 dots appeared as she typed, then, he'd be happy you're there. Call if you need to talk. Love you. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, oddly comforted. Emma understood why I'd come here, even before I fully did myself. This was my equivalent of her ghost ranch. A place to remember, to reconnect with something essential that had gotten lost along the way. Over the next few days, I fell into a rhythm at the cabin. Mornings on the dock with coffee. Afternoons spent making minor repairs Dad would have tackled without a second thought. Fixing the squeaky screen door, replacing rotted boards on the deck, clearing debris from the stone path leading to the water. Evenings by the fire, leafing through Dad's old books, many filled with his neat handwriting in the margins. In one volume, a dog-eared collection of Thoreau, I found a passage Dad had underlined. If one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life which he has imagined, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. Beside it, in his steady script, "Remember, it's never too late to change course." I stared at the words, feeling as if he'd written them specifically for me to find in this moment. Dad had been a high school English teacher, passionate about literature, and even more passionate about helping his students find their own paths. He'd encouraged both Emma and me to pursue what moved us, regardless of practicality or convention. Somewhere along the way, after his death, I'd lost sight of that guidance. My job in corporate finance was stable and well-paying, but it had never been my dream, just a safe harbor I drifted into during the storm of grief that followed losing him. I'd stayed because it was easier than asking the harder questions. What did I actually want? What would make getting up each morning feel purposeful rather than perfunctory? On my 4th day at the cabin, I received an email that felt like another sign. This one less mystical than finding Dad's marginalia, but no less significant. The local high school where Dad had taught was looking for someone to teach a summer writing workshop for at-risk youth. The previous instructor had canceled last minute, leaving them scrambling to find a replacement before the program started in 3 weeks. I'd never taught formally, but I'd majored in English before pragmatism led me to an MBA. I'd written constantly in college, short stories, essays, even the beginning of a novel I'd abandoned when real life demanded my attention. And I'd edited the literary magazine where Emma had published her first poems, patiently helping young writers shape their raw talent into something polished. Before I could overthink it, I responded to the email, offering my services. By that evening, I'd scheduled an interview for the following week. When I called Emma to tell her, she was quiet for a long moment after I finished speaking. "Noah," she finally said, "that's perfect for you. It's what you always wanted to do, isn't it?" Before Dad died, and I decided someone needed to be the practical one. I finished for her. "Yeah, I guess it is." "He would be over the moon about this," she said, her voice warm with certainty. "Remember how he used to say teaching was the closest thing to magic that exists in the ordinary world?" I did remember. Dad had believed that helping someone discover their voice, whether through literature, writing, or simply having conversations that mattered, was a kind of alchemy, transforming not just the student, but the teacher as well. "It's just a summer position," I cautioned, not wanting to oversell the significance. 3 weeks with teenagers who probably don't want to be there." "It's a beginning," Emma countered. "A step in a different direction. That's how all journeys start." After we hung up, I walked back down to the dock, watching the moon's reflection ripple across the lake's surface. Emma was right. This was a beginning, small but meaningful. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of genuine excitement about what lay ahead. The next day, I packed up to leave the cabin, ensuring everything was secure before locking the door behind me. But unlike when I'd arrived, this departure didn't feel like abandonment. If anything, it felt like a promise to return, to reclaim this space and the memories it held, not as a shrine to what was lost, but as a foundation for what might still be built. As I drove back toward the city, I found myself thinking about the parallel journeys Emma and I were on. Hers beginning in the dramatic rupture of a wedding day that never happened. Mine in the quieter recognition that somewhere along the way, I'd settled for less than the life I'd once imagined for myself. Different catalysts, different paths, but perhaps the same destination. A return to authenticity, to living by our own compasses rather than others. Expectations. The interview at Dad's old high school went better than I could have hoped. The principal, a former colleague of his, recognized my name immediately, ushering me into an office adorned with photos of graduating classes stretching back decades. In several, Dad stood grinning among rows of students, his hand resting on the shoulder of some shy teenager who'd found their voice in his classroom. "Richard was one of the finest teachers we ever had," the principal said, studying me with undisguised curiosity. "The students still talk about him, you know, the ones who had him before he got sick. They call his class life-changing." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. He had that effect on people. "And now his son wants to teach our summer program," she mused. "Tell me, Noah, why this job? Your resume is impressive. Finance, consulting, an MBA from Northwestern. You're overqualified for a temporary position working with troubled teens." The question was fair, and I took my time answering, wanting to be honest without seeming maudlin or unprofessional. "I've been successful in my career," I began slowly, "but not fulfilled. Coming back here, to the community where I grew up, where my father made such an impact, it feels right. These students deserve someone who sees their potential, who can help them find their voices. That's what my dad did for generations of kids, and if I can do even a fraction of that, it would mean more than any corporate achievement. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied. "The pay is terrible," she warned. "The hours are long. Some of these kids have had hard lives, and they won't trust you easily." "I understand. But," she continued, "if you're half the teacher your father was, they'll be lucky to have you." She extended her hand. "The position is yours if you want it." I accepted on the spot, a decision that would require rearranging my entire life, taking a leave of absence from my job in Chicago, finding temporary housing near the school, pushing my apartment search into the fall. But as I drove away from the interview, I felt lighter than I had in years, as if I'd set down a burden I hadn't fully recognized I was carrying. That evening, I called Emma again, eager to share the news. The connection was spotty. She was hiking somewhere in the New Mexico wilderness, but her excitement came through clearly. "I knew it," she exclaimed. "I just knew they'd hire you. When do you start?" 3 weeks from Monday, I said. "I need to head back to Chicago first, tie up some loose ends, pack what I'll need for the summer. And then?" I hesitated, the magnitude of the change finally hitting me. "And then I guess I figure it out as I go. The program runs through August. After that, I don't know yet." "That's the beauty of it," Emma said, her voice fading in and out with the poor reception. "Not knowing. Being open to possibilities." We talked a while longer, sharing our respective adventures, her rediscovery of painting, my tentative steps toward a new career path. Before we hung up, she said something that stayed with me long after the call ended. "You know what I realized, Noah? When I called off the wedding, I thought I was giving something up, losing something. But actually, I was making room, creating space for something better, something truer to who I am." Her words resonated deeply. Perhaps that's what I was doing too, not abandoning the life I'd built, but making room for something more aligned with my core self, the person I'd been before grief and practicality had narrowed my vision. Back in Chicago the following week, I submitted paperwork for a 3-month leave of absence, explaining to my bewildered boss that I needed time to explore other opportunities. I packed up essential belongings from my sterile downtown apartment, arranging to sublet it for the summer. I called Megan, my recent ex, to share my plans, finding unexpected support in her response. "This sounds more like the Noah I first met," she said warmly. "The one who talked about books and ideas with such passion, before you got swallowed by spreadsheets and client meetings." "Was I really that bad?" I asked, wincing. "Not bad," she clarified. "Just faded somehow, like watching someone slowly turn down the dimmer switch on their own light." It was an uncomfortable truth, but one I needed to hear. I had dimmed my own light, convincing myself it was the responsible choice, the adult path. But what Dad had always taught us, what Emma had remembered and I had forgotten, was that true responsibility means honoring your authentic self, not abandoning it for security or convention. 2 days before I was scheduled to leave Chicago, I received another call from Emma. Her voice was different, steadier, more centered than I'd heard in years. "I'm not coming back," she announced without preamble. "Not right away, at least." "What do you mean?" I asked, pausing in the middle of boxing books for storage. "The director of the art program here offered me a position as an assistant instructor for their summer session," she explained. "It's not much money, but room and board are included. And Noah, I'm painting again. Really painting. Good work, work that matters to me." Pride surged through me, alongside a touch of surprise at how decisively she'd acted. "That's amazing, Em. Dad would be..." Bursting with pride, she finished. "I know, that's part of why I said yes. I keep thinking about what he always told us. Do what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is people who have come alive." I smiled at the familiar quote, one of Dad's favorites, often repeated around our dinner table. "So you'll stay through the summer?" "At least," she confirmed. "After that, who knows? Maybe I'll come back east, maybe I'll find somewhere new. But I'm done letting fear make my decisions." I spent 2 years with Daniel because I was afraid of being alone, afraid of starting over. Not anymore. We talked a while longer, comparing notes on our parallel journeys of rediscovery. Before we hung up, Emma said one more thing that cemented my conviction about the path ahead. You know what's funny, Noah? If I hadn't called off the wedding, if I hadn't been brave enough to listen to that voice inside saying something was wrong, I would have missed all of this. The painting, the mountains, the feeling of being fully myself again. She paused. And you might still be stuck in that job you hate, never knowing what else was possible. I don't hate my job, I protested weakly. But you don't love it, she countered. And life's too short not to love what fills your days. After we hung up, I stood in my half-packed apartment, surrounded by the trappings of a life that had never quite fit. Emma was right. Her moment of crisis, painful as it had been, had created a ripple effect that reached far beyond her own journey. In supporting her through that darkness, I'd found the courage to face my own crossroads. The day before I left Chicago, I visited the lake. Not our family's remote cabin, but the vast expanse of Lake Michigan that defined the city's eastern edge. I sat on a bench along the shore, watching sailboats tack against the wind, their white sails bright against the blue horizon. A sense of peace settled over me, deeper than anything I'd felt since before Dad's illness. Tomorrow I would drive back to New York, to the small town where we'd grown up, where Dad had shaped generations of young minds, where I would now attempt to do the same. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but increasingly, it felt like the life I was meant for. Emma was in New Mexico, rediscovering her art and herself. I was heading east, reclaiming a legacy and a passion I'd set aside too long. Mom was finding her own way forward, dating again for the first time since Dad died, volunteering at the hospital where he'd spent his final months. We were all, in our different ways, following our compasses rather than our clocks. Choosing truth over expectation, authenticity over security, the harder path that led toward fulfillment, rather than the easier one that led only to safety. And somewhere, I like to think, Dad was watching, proud of the lessons that had taken root, growing even in the soil of grief and loss, blossoming now into new beginnings none of us could have predicted. 1 year after Emma called off her wedding, we gathered at Ghost Ranch for an entirely different celebration. The New Mexico sunset painted the cliffs in shades of amber and gold, the vast landscape stretching beyond us like a living canvas. Wooden tables arranged in a semicircle on the outdoor patio held mason jars filled with wildflowers. No formal centerpieces, no color-coordinated linens, just simple beauty that needed no enhancement. Emma stood at the edge of the gathering, speaking animatedly with the director of the arts program that had become her home these past 12 months. Her hands moved expressively as she talked, paint still embedded beneath her fingernails despite her attempts to scrub them clean for the occasion. She looked radiant, not with the manufactured perfection she'd cultivated during her time with Daniel, but with the genuine glow of someone fully inhabiting their own life. "Quite a transformation, isn't it?" Mom said, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of wine. She handed one to me, following my gaze to where Emma now laughed at something the director had said. I hardly recognize her sometimes. "In the best possible way," I agreed, accepting the glass. "Have you seen the exhibition?" Mom nodded, her eyes bright with pride. 3 times already. I keep finding new details in her paintings that I missed before. The celebration was ostensibly for the opening of Emma's first solo exhibition, a collection of landscapes and abstract works that had already attracted attention from galleries in Santa Fe. But in truth, we were celebrating something larger. The anniversary of the day she chose herself over expectations, authenticity over compromise. "And what about you?" Mom asked, turning her attention to me. "Any regrets about extending your teaching position into the fall semester?" I shook my head, smiling. None. The summer program went better than I could have hoped. These kids, they just needed someone to see them, to believe their stories matter. I took a sip of wine, thinking about the classroom that had become my sanctuary over the past year. I'm not saying it's been easy. Some days I come home completely drained, wondering if I'm making any difference at all. "But?" Mom prompted, knowing there was more. "But then someone will write something so honest it takes my breath away. Or a student who hasn't spoken all semester will suddenly find their voice. And in those moments, I struggle to find the words to capture the feeling. In those moments, I understand what Dad meant about teaching being magic. Mom squeezed my arm, her eyes suspiciously bright. "He would be so proud of both of you. Following your compasses, just like he always said." The phrase had become a sort of family mantra over the past year, a shorthand for the courage to choose the harder but truer path, even when convention or convenience pulled in another direction. Across the patio, Emma caught my eye and waved me over. I excused myself to Mom and made my way through the crowd, accepting congratulations from the art community members who had come to support my sister's debut. "Noah," she greeted me with a warm hug. "Come meet Elizabeth. She's the one who convinced the gallery in Santa Fe to feature my work." The woman beside Emma extended her hand. "So you're the famous brother. I've heard so much about you." "All lies," I joked, shaking her hand. "Except the part about me being devastatingly handsome and brilliant." Emma rolled her eyes. "Ignore him. He developed an inflated ego after his students started winning national writing competitions." It was true. 3 of my students had received recognition in prestigious contests over the past year. Their success had brought unexpected attention to our small-town high school, including a grant to expand the creative writing program I'd developed. "Emma tells me you're planning to stay in New Mexico," Elizabeth said. "That you're house hunting in Santa Fe?" I nodded, still somewhat amazed by this turn of events myself. My school approved a year-long sabbatical to write. Santa Fe has a strong literary community, and it's close enough that Emma and I can still see each other regularly. Plus, Emma added with a mischievous smile, it means he can continue dating that charming bookstore owner he met at my last exhibition. I felt my face warm slightly. Mara and I are taking things slow. Glacially slow, Emma teased. You've been on, what, 6 dates in 2 months? Some of us prefer to get to know someone before making life-altering commitments. I countered, but there was no heat in my words. Emma's teasing was good-natured, and truth be told, the deliberate pace of my relationship with Mara felt right after years of drifting through connections that never quite took root. As the evening progressed, I found myself standing slightly apart from the celebration, watching my family with a sense of wonder at how much had changed in a single year. Mom was deep in conversation with a group of artists, her confidence visibly restored after the initial shock of Emma's canceled wedding had faded. She'd finally sold our childhood home 6 months ago, buying a smaller place closer to the hospital, where she now volunteered full-time. The grief that had shadowed her since Dad's death hadn't disappeared, but it had softened, making room for new joy. Emma moved through the crowd with easy grace, stopping to explain her work to interested viewers, accepting compliments with a humility that was entirely genuine. She had flourished here in ways none of us could have predicted, not just as an artist, but as a teacher, a friend, a community member. She'd even started a small non-profit that brought art supplies and instruction to underserved rural schools in the area. And me? I'd transformed too, though perhaps more quietly. The corporate suits had given way to casual button-downs. The driven, achievement-oriented mindset had mellowed into something more patient, more present. I'd rediscovered not just my love of teaching, but my own voice as a writer. The novel I'd abandoned years ago now taking shape again, one patient page at a time. None of us were where we'd expected to be a year ago. All of us were exactly where we needed to be. Later that night, after most guests had departed, Emma and I sat on the porch of her small cabin on the Ghost Ranch property. The stars spread across the New Mexico sky like diamonds scattered on black velvet, more brilliant than anything I'd seen in Chicago's light-polluted nights. "Remember that night on Mom's porch?" Emma asked softly. "The night before, what should have been my wedding?" "Vividly," I replied. "You looked so lost." She nodded, pulling her knees up to her chest. I was terrified. Not just of calling everything off, but of what would come after. The emptiness. The questions. The starting over. She gestured to the vast landscape around us, barely visible in the moonlight but powerfully present. "I never imagined this. Any of it. Do you ever regret it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Walking away from the life you'd planned?" Emma was quiet for a moment, considering the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "I regret the pain it caused. To Mom, to friends who had traveled for the wedding. I regret not seeing Daniel clearly sooner." She turned to look at me, her expression serene in the soft glow of the porch light. But regret the decision itself? Never. It was the first truly brave thing I'd done in years. I thought about courage then, how it rarely looks like what we expect. How sometimes the bravest act isn't charging into danger but walking away from something that diminishes you, even when staying would be easier, more comfortable, more socially acceptable. You know, Emma continued, I got an email from Daniel last month. This surprised me. What did he want? To apologize, apparently. He's in therapy now, said he's working on his issues with control and validation. She shrugged. He wanted to know if we could get coffee sometime when I'm back east. And will you? I asked, careful to keep my tone neutral, despite the protective instinct flaring inside me. She shook her head decisively. No. His journey is his own now, and I wish him well with it. But some bridges, once burned, don't need to be rebuilt. She smiled slightly. Besides, I'm seeing someone now. Have been for a few months. What? I straightened, genuinely shocked. How did I not know this? Emma laughed at my expression. Because unlike some people, I don't share every detail of my personal life with my siblings. Her expression softened. His name is Julian. He teaches sculpture here at the ranch. And he's... She paused, searching for the right words. He's kind, thoughtful. He sees me clearly and likes what he sees. I want to meet him, I said immediately. You will, when it's time. Emma's tone made it clear the subject was closed for now. The point is, if I hadn't called off the wedding, if I hadn't listened to that voice inside saying something was wrong, I would never have found my way here. To this place, this work, this life that finally feels like mine. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the coyotes calling in the distance. Finally, Emma spoke again, her voice thoughtful. You know what I realized recently? That day wasn't just about saying no to Daniel, it was about saying yes to myself. To the possibility that I deserved more than I was settling for. Her words resonated deeply. Wasn't that what the past year had been about for all of us? In different ways. Saying yes to ourselves after years of compromise, practicality, putting others first. Mom finding purpose in volunteer work that honored Dad's memory while creating space for her own identity beyond grief. Me rediscovering my passion for teaching and writing after years in a career that had never truly fit. Emma rebuilding her life around creativity and authenticity rather than others' expectations. Do you remember what Dad used to say about crossroads? I asked. Emma smiled. That they're not obstacles but invitations. Chances to choose again, to course correct, to realign with our true north. Exactly, I nodded. I think that's what this year has been for all of us. A series of crossroads, of chances to choose again. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the red cliffs of Ghost Ranch glowing in the early light. I rose early, joining Emma for what had become our ritual during my visits, a hike before the day's heat made outdoor activity uncomfortable. We climbed in companionable silence, stopping occasionally to admire a particularly striking vista or unusual plant. The physical exertion felt good after the emotional intensity of the previous evening's celebration. I have something to show you, Emma said when we reached a plateau about halfway up the trail. She led me slightly off the path to a spot overlooking the valley below. I come here to think sometimes, to paint when the light is right. I could see why. The view was breathtaking, layers of colored stone stretching to the horizon, juniper and pinyon dotting the landscape like brushstrokes on a canvas too vast to comprehend fully. This is where I painted Crossroads, she said, referring to the centerpiece of her exhibition, a large abstract landscape that somehow captured both physical terrain and emotional journey. I was thinking about Dad a lot that day, about what he would say if he could see us now. I felt a familiar tightness in my throat at the mention of our father. He'd be proud of you, of the courage it took to change course. Of both of us, Emma corrected gently. He'd be proud of both of us. She reached into her small backpack, and pulled out a carefully wrapped package. "Which is why I wanted to give you this. I was going to wait until your birthday, but this feels right." I unwrapped the package slowly, revealing a small painting I hadn't seen in her exhibition. Unlike her typical abstract landscapes, this was a portrait. Dad, sitting on the dock at our lake house, fishing rod in hand, face turned slightly toward the viewer with that characteristic gentle smile that had guided so many students, including his own children, toward their better selves. "Emma," I managed, emotion making my voice rough. I found an old photo in Mom's albums," she explained, "from that summer before he got sick. Remember how he used to say the sunrise at the lake was better than any sermon for restoring your faith in possibilities?" I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The painting captured not just Dad's likeness, but something essential about his spirit: the quiet wisdom, the patient presence, the belief in second chances and new beginnings that had shaped our family's philosophy. "Turn it over," Emma instructed softly. On the back, she had written in her elegant script, "It's never too late to follow your compass." Dad. The simple message, his words, her hand, bridged past and present, loss and renewal, in a way that left me momentarily speechless. When I finally looked up, I saw tears in Emma's eyes that matched my own. "Thank you," I said simply, knowing she would understand all that those two words contained. We stood together on that plateau for a long time, the painting between us, the vast landscape stretching beyond, both of us lost in private thoughts that somehow felt communal, reflections on the paths that had led us here, so different from what we'd planned, yet so perfectly aligned with who we were meant to be. Later that day, as I prepared to drive to Santa Fe where I'd be house-sitting for a writer friend while finalizing my own living arrangements, Emma walked me to my car. The exhibition was continuing for another week, drawing steady crowds despite the remote location. "When will you be back?" she asked, as I loaded my bag into the trunk. "Next weekend," I promised. "Mara wants to see your show before it closes, and I promised to introduce you two properly." Emma grinned. "The famous Mara. I'm beginning to think you made her up." "You've met her twice," I protested, briefly in crowded rooms. Emma countered. "Hardly enough time to properly interrogate the woman dating my brother." I shook my head, smiling despite myself. "Be gentle with her. Some of us aren't as naturally outgoing as you artistic types." Emma's expression softened. "I'll be on my best behavior. Promise." She hesitated, then added more seriously, "I'm happy for you, Noah. She seems like someone who sees you clearly." The phrase resonated. Being seen clearly, without projection or expectation, was perhaps the greatest gift any relationship could offer. It was what Emma had never truly had with Daniel, what I'd been missing in my previous relationships in Chicago, what we were both finding now in different ways. "That's the thing about course corrections," I said, pulling her into a hug. "Sometimes they lead you exactly where you need to be, even if it's nowhere near where you thought you were headed." Emma returned the embrace tightly. "Drive safe. Call when you get there." "Always do," I assured her, getting into the car. As I drove away, I watched her in the rearview mirror, standing tall against the backdrop of red cliffs, waving until I turned the corner and she disappeared from view. The painting she'd given me was carefully wrapped in the passenger seat, a tangible reminder of the invisible threads that connected us across distance and time. The road to Santa Fe stretched before me, winding through terrain that still felt new and wondrous after years in Chicago's urban grid. I thought about the year behind us, the canceled wedding that had somehow set us all free, the difficult conversations, the leap of faith it took to leave established paths for uncertain new directions. There had been hard moments, of course. Emma had struggled with debt from the non-refundable wedding costs. I'd taken a significant pay cut to pursue teaching. We'd both faced questions and judgment from those who couldn't understand our choices. But with each passing month, the rightness of our decisions had become more evident, not just in external markers of success, but in the quiet certainty that we were finally living in alignment with our truest selves. As the landscape shifted around me, I found myself thinking of all the people who remain trapped in lives that don't fit, afraid to make the change, to disappoint others, to face the empty space that follows a significant ending. How many weddings proceed despite deep misgivings? How many careers continue long after passion has faded? How many lives are lived according to others' expectations rather than internal truth? Emma's courage had created a ripple effect that extended far beyond her own journey. Her decision had freed not just herself, but, in a very real way, all of us, giving permission by example to choose authenticity over convention, fulfillment over security, the harder truth over the easier compromise. The road curved, revealing the distant skyline of Santa Fe nestled among the hills. Somewhere in that city was the small adobe house I'd be renting starting next month. The writing desk where my novel was slowly taking shape. The bookstore where Mara worked and where our cautious courtship had begun. A new chapter unfolding, page by patient page. I glanced at the painting beside me, carefully secured against the journey's bumps and turns. Dad's gentle smile seemed to hold all the wisdom we'd needed, but had to discover for ourselves. That sometimes, the greatest act of courage is simply to listen to the quiet voice within, the one that knows when something isn't right, the one that believes in better possibilities even when the path toward them isn't clear. Emma had listened to that voice a year ago today, standing firm, despite the enormous pressure to proceed with a wedding that would have diminished her true self. That single act of courage had changed everything, not just for her, but for all of us. A reminder that it's never too late to change course, to begin again, to follow your compass rather than your clock. As I drove toward my own new beginning, I felt a profound gratitude for the sister who had shown such bravery in her darkest moment, and for the father whose wisdom continued to guide us even in his absence. Some silences, it turns out, speak volumes, if only we have the courage to listen. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.